Okay, just for a second, imagine you're out there. You're in the middle of a huge, dark ocean. And no matter which way you look, it's just nothing, just an endless horizon of water. For weeks, you and your crew have been sailing further into the great unknown than anyone in history. And the guy who led you here, Christopher Columbus, well, he seems just as lost as you are. See, this isn't some story about glorious exploration. Not really. It's a story about pure desperation, a whole lot of deception, and a massive gamble that almost failed and changed the world in the process.
30 days, a full month, and for every single one of those agonizing days, there's been no sign of life. Nothing. No birds, no floating seaweed, zip. You were promised Japan, a land overflowing with gold and spices, but all you found is this terrifying, crushing emptiness. You know, hope is a kind of currency out here, and yours has completely run out. And you can hear it in the whispers spreading among the crew. The mood is definitely shifting from scared to angry.
So this becomes the question, the only question that matters. The captain, he's a foreigner, an Italian. Some of the men are saying he's a madman, that he's leading you all right off the edge of the world to die. Your food is literally rotting, the water is foul, and this ship feels less like a vessel and more like a floating coffin. So what do? I mean, really, what would you do? Would you rise up, take control of the ship, and turn back to save your own life? Or do you trust this captain's wild promises for just one more day?
To really get why the crew was so terrified, you got to understand just how physically miserable and psychologically broken these guys were. I mean, they weren't just crossing an ocean. In their minds, they were sailing into a complete void, a place that existed outside the laws of God and man.
Yeah, forget any of those romantic paintings of grand ships you've seen. The reality of life at sea in 1492 was just brutal. The smallest ship, the Nina, was only about 50 feet long. That's roughly the size of a modern city bus. Now imagine cramming 20 grown men onto that bus for months on end. There were no beds for the crew. They just slept wherever they could find a spot on the open deck, totally exposed to the wind and rain. Their food, rock-hard biscuits, usually crawling with weevils. Their water, it grew slimier by the day. It was just a miserable, stinking, claustrophobic existence.
And on top of all that physical misery was this immense psychological weight. They had sailed past the last known point on any map, the Canary Islands, and into an ocean they literally called the Sea of Darkness. This wasn't just an empty space on the map to them. No, it was a place of terrifying legend, a place filled with sea monsters, boiling waters, and giant waterfalls that just poured off the edge of the earth. So every creak of the ship, every weird-looking cloud, it all just fed into their deepest fears.
Now Columbus, he knew his crew was right on the edge of panic. He was a brilliant navigator, no doubt about it, but he was also a master of manipulation. He knew that the truth, the sheer, terrifying distance they had actually traveled, would spark an instant mutiny. So he came up with a very clever and incredibly dishonest plan to buy himself more time. He started keeping 2 separate logbooks. It's brilliant, really. One was his private log, where he kept his real, accurate record of their progress. But the other one, that was the public log, a complete work of fiction for the crew to see. So let's say they actually sailed 60 miles one day. He'd stroll out on deck and announce to the men that they'd only gone 48. He was deliberately tricking them, creating this false reality where home always seemed just a little bit closer than it really was. But here's the thing. Columbus couldn't control the ocean itself. And pretty soon, Mother Nature threw 2 new horrors at them that his lies just couldn't explain. First, they sailed right into the Sargasso Sea, this massive, bizarre stretch of ocean that's choked with thick seaweed. The sailors were terrified the ships would get tangled up and just stuck there forever. And then, something even scarier happened. The compasses stopped working right. The needle wasn't pointing true to the North Star anymore. Now today, we know this is just magnetic declination. But to them, it looked like the fundamental laws of physics were breaking down. It was proof they had entered a cursed part of the world.
By early October, the lies weren't working anymore. The fear had curdled into pure, outright anger. The crew of the Santa Maria started openly plotting mutiny. They were actually debating whether to just throw the captain overboard. Then, on October 10th, the whole situation finally exploded, forcing Columbus into the ultimate negotiation for his life and his dream.
He's cornered. He's out of tricks. So Columbus makes this desperate deal. He looks his mutinous crew right in the eyes and asks for just 3 more days. That's it. It was this incredibly dramatic ultimatum. He was basically putting a ticking clock on the entire expedition. The crew, exhausted, but maybe, just maybe, seeing one last glimmer of hope, they reluctantly agreed. The countdown was on.
And so the clock starts ticking. October 10th, the deal is struck. The very next day, October 11th, these tantalizing little signs start appearing. The crew fishes a branch out of the water, and it's clearly been carved by a human hand. Then they see another one covered in fresh berries. Flocks of birds are flying southwest. You can just feel it. Land has to be close. But as night falls, the horizon is still empty, and their deal is set to expire in just a few hours.
The tension on those 3 little ships must have been absolutely unbearable. I mean, the fate of every man on board, and you could say the course of world history, was hanging on the next few hours. And then, in the dead of night, it came. The moment that would justify all the suffering, all the fear, and all the deception.
2 o'clock in the morning. The final hours of the deal are ticking away. High up in the crow's nest of the Pinta, a lookout named Rodrigo de Triana is straining his eyes, staring into the darkness. And then he screams it. Tierra! Tierra! Land! Land! That was the word that saved every single one of them. The single shout that just shattered the terror and announced their arrival in a world that no European had ever laid eyes on. They dropped anchor, and they waited for the sun to rise. You can bet not a single person slept that night. So on the morning of October 12, 1492, they rowed ashore, and the world changed forever. And the culture shock of that moment, it's just profound. On one side, you've got Columbus's men wearing armor, bearded, exhausted, carrying steel swords. And on the other side, you have the native Taino people, naked, with their bodies painted, carrying simple wooden spears. The two halves of humanity, separated for thousands of years, were standing face to face with absolutely no concept of the other's world. Columbus named the island San Salvador, and he was convinced he was somewhere in the Indies just off the coast of Asia. And those first interactions, they were actually peaceful. But Columbus wasn't looking for friends. He was looking for profit. And one tiny, gleaming little detail would very quickly shift the entire purpose of this mission from exploration to exploitation.
It all came down to one small piece of jewelry. Columbus noticed that some of the Taino people wore these little gold rings in their noses. And in that instant, everything changed. The friendly exchange of glass beads for parrots, that was over. The mission now had one and only one objective: find the source of that gold.
So as they sailed south, searching for this gold, disaster struck. On Christmas Eve of all nights, the flagship, the Santa Maria, runs aground on a reef and is wrecked. Now Columbus has a logistical nightmare. He's got the crews of 3 ships, but only 2 tiny vessels left to get them all home. It's impossible. So he makes a fateful decision. He orders his men to salvage the timber from the wrecked Santa Maria and build a fort. He names it La Navidad. And he decides to leave 39 men behind with one simple order: find the gold mine. He promised he'd be back for them. And so, Columbus sails back to Spain a hero, bringing proof of a new world. But he left a little piece of the old world behind. 39 men, stranded in what they saw as paradise, with an insatiable lust for gold. So when Columbus returned a year later with a massive fleet ready to colonize, what do you think he found? Did he find his men rich with gold? Or did he discover that the sea of darkness was nothing compared to the darkness that can be found in the hearts of men?